Winning an NBA title is one of the greatest achievements a player can attain, a feat that marks careers forever. Many have achieved this in ways that have completely changed their trajectory, especially those who were once considered among the best in the world but have seen their performance decline over time. Even so, some of these veterans managed to find success again, becoming important players in championship teams, something that greatly helped in building their legacies. But on the other hand, while we've seen many legends achieve ultimate glory, there are also many incredible players who never won the ring. In some cases, fate simply didn't cooperate. Injuries, weak rosters, or circumstances beyond one's control. In other cases, specific factors ended up playing a role and explain why these players finished their careers without a title. Each of them has their own story, their own reasons, and their own obstacles. And that explains why their journeys, however grand they may have been, ultimately fell short of expectations. Did that change any way you thought about anything about yourself, about your teammates, about the game? That was the time when I knew it was time for me. Maybe for the first time, basketball wasn't enjoyable for me, and the maturity level wasn't the same. Red Miller was one of the best players of his era, a lethal shooter who became the main name of the Indiana Pacers. Like many before and after him, Red was the type of player who, no matter how hard he tried to compete with the best, always had an inferior team around him. Still, he was good enough to frequently lead his team to the playoffs. The closest he came to the finals in the 90s was in 1998, when he faced the Chicago Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. That year, the Pacers were one of the biggest challengers for the champions on defense, and to this day, alongside the Detroit Pistons, they remain a more difficult obstacle that Michael Jordan has faced. This series went to Game 7, a long and grueling contest for both teams, which ended with Chicago winning by just 5 points. Even though the Pacers gave the Bulls a lot of trouble, the inferiority of the roster ultimately proved decisive. The most frustrating thing is that, in 1998, they could have been the champions of a Chicago-based sport. Red would still have another chance to reach the finals in 2000, at a time when the East was wide open after Michael Jordan's retirement. This time, the opponent was the Los Angeles Lakers, led by Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal, who were seeking their first title together as a duo. The Pacer fought his hardest, but it simply wasn't enough. Kobe and Shaq were more motivated by the victory. They were younger, and they managed to close out the series in 6 games, leaving Reds without a title on their resume once again. In the following years, his team continued to be a small fish in an ocean of giants in the Eastern Conference. But in the 2004 season, Pisces began to show improvement, with talents like Metal Warpace and Jermaine O'Neal standing out. The older Red took on the role of mentor, and the team finished with the best record in the NBA during the regular season. They ended up being eliminated in the second round by the Detroit Pistons, who would then beat the Lakers in the 2004 finals. Even so, there was optimism for the upcoming season. The team signed Steven Jackson, making the roster even stronger. And finally, for the first time in Red's career, he had a superior team. During that season, the Pacers were seen as the best team in the NBA. He was no longer the underdog, and there was confidence that 2005 would be the year of the title. But everything crumbled in a single, tragic night. The domino effect of that episode would be felt for many years. For the Pacers, and especially for Red, it was devastating. Ron Artest was suspended for the entire season, while Jermaine O'Neal and Steven Jackson also received lengthy suspensions. That completely killed the team's momentum, and that's how Red Miller's journey ended. That would be his last year in the NBA, ending his career after the 2005 playoffs with an emotional farewell in the second round. He had a career worthy of great fame, being one of the best players to ever play the game, but he never managed to reach the top, almost always because he played for inferior teams. And the only time he had a truly strong cast, it was all destroyed by a mistake from his teammates. Many players have felt the weight of being considered inferior, but Red Miller is perhaps the perfect example of how this can shape a career. Still, he tried to win the right way, with the same team that drafted him. The next player, however, also tried to follow that path, but went astray, and that ended up tarnishing his image forever. When James Harden was drafted, he wasn't the best player on the team. In fact, he came from the bench as the 6th man, still developing and showing signs that he could become a future NBA star. In their first appearance on the Signs, With the Oklahoma City Thunder, the team ended up losing, and shortly after, in the offseason, Harden would be traded. That's when he assumed the role of leader in the Houston Rockets, a team that now revolved completely around him. Year after year, Harden tried to win the right way, but failed repeatedly. On some occasions, he himself was the reason the team couldn't take the next step, mainly due to his inefficiencies in crucial moments. In others, they simply faced historically unbeatable teams. The closest they came to returning to the finals was in 2018, when the Houston Rockets, alongside Chris Paul, had perhaps the best roster of the Harden era. That year, they even took a 3-2 lead in the Western Conference Finals against the Golden State Warriors. But everything that could go wrong did. The team fell apart, Harden underperformed, and the chance at a title was gone. After that, the Rockets never returned to the conference finals. Harden's frustration with the franchise only grew, and he did everything he could to force a trade to an elite team. In the end, he left behind the city that had welcomed him with open arms, without looking back. The Brooklyn Nets would be his next destination. There, Harden joined Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, forming a super team that, on paper, seemed destined to win multiple titles. But basketball days had other plans and ended any real chance Harden had of beating him. It became clear that he wouldn't win a title so easily. Frustrated once again, Harden requested a trade and ended up going to the Philadelphia 76ers, his second attempt to win a championship. However, at this point in his career, Harden was no longer the superstar point guard he once was. Even so, he was still good enough to be the second option for a competitive team. In the playoffs, the Sixers tried to reach the finals, but everything fell apart, especially for Harden, and they disappointed in consecutive years. At times, it seemed he would finally overcome his reputation for making poor decisions, but he always ended up falling short of expectations. Things only got worse over time. He had problems within the team again, this time with Daryl Morey, the Sixers general manager. Harden even publicly called him a liar and vowed never to play for him again, after not being traded despite opting to remain under contract. So, Harden forced another trade, this time to the Los Angeles Clippers, where he joined Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and Russell Westbrook. It was clear at that point that he was looking for squads ready to secure a title. But as he got older, time began to work against him. This seemed to be his last great chance to win the ring. The Clippers had a rocky start to Saturday's season, but they quickly found their rhythm, which gave fans hope and led many to believe the team could be a dangerous underdog in the Western Conference. However, in the playoffs, there was yet another disappointment. Allen was plagued by injuries, Kawhi couldn't play, and the team ended up being eliminated in the first round by the Dallas Mavericks. Harden, for his part, did everything he could in that series, but the fact that he was already on his third team in 5 years showed that he never had the patience to trust the process and win with the Houston Rockets. His obsession with winning a title ended up tarnishing his reputation. Today, even as MVP1 and one of the greatest offensive talents in the history of the game, Harden is seen as someone who failed in the playoffs, and for many, as a player who will never be a true winner. I am the MVP of this league. Like you, I am. It had been a long time since the Philadelphia 76ers were considered a threat in the Eastern Conference. The last time the franchise had won the championship was in 1983 with Gleo Zervin and Moses Malone. But in 1996, everything changed. Allen Iverson was drafted by Philly, a player with a killer instinct who did things few had seen before. He carried the city on his shoulders, determined to take it back to the top. However, Iverson was not fortunate enough to have a squad capable of competing for titles. During its peak, the team doesn't even appreciate this consistency in the playoffs. Therefore, his mindset was clear. We are going to win, my way. On December 1st, he accomplished a feat beyond human capabilities, leading the Sixers to the NBA Finals, which earned him the MVP award for the season. He was literally a one-man army, the engine of the offense and the heart of the team, facing Kobe and Shaq's Los Angeles Lakers, who were undefeated in the playoffs until then. Even when at a disadvantage, Iverson delivered one of the most legendary performances in finals history, managing to steal a game from the Lakers. That performance immortalized him in the history of the sport and is remembered to this day. But the downside of having such a spectacular player with a warrior mentality was that the team never managed to develop around him. Over the years, the lack of support and results led to Iverson's departure, eventually leading him to play for the Denver Nuggets. Even at their peak, alongside Carmelo Anthony, Iverson and Melo had the potential to form a championship-level duo, but problems began to arise. The two players are very similar, both with an alpha mentality. Iverson, in particular, had never been placed in a situation where he needed to be the team's second choice. Like Melo, he wanted the attack to go through his hands. This similarity ultimately prevented them from achieving any real success. They never won a title and didn't even manage to get past the first round of the playoffs, being eliminated in a humiliating way in 1007 and 1008. Iverson's inability to adapt to a more collective game and play within a more balanced system ultimately led to his trade to the Detroit Pistons. From then on, his career was never the same again. Even though he was getting older and playing for a rebuilding team, he refused to leave the bench and insisted on remaining a starter. This attitude led him to end his career in the only way he knew how, like a warrior. Despite never winning a title, the comeback is still remembered today for the cultural impact it had on the NBA. A ring would have cemented his legacy, but he had already made his mark on the game in other ways, while his former teammate, Carmelo Anthony, has been gradually forgotten, largely due to his own choices. Because of their own choices. Over time, Carmelo Anthony ended up becoming the ugly duckling of the legendary 1993 draft class, a group that included names like LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. When he arrived at the Denver Nuggets, Melo made an immediate impact, leading the team to the playoffs in his first season and repeating that feat for several consecutive years. The problem was that, despite his consistency, he was almost always eliminated in the first round. In all his appearances with Denver, he only managed to go further once, in 2009, when he finally led the team to the Western Conference Finals. Unfortunately, even that year, the story didn't end as he had hoped. Melo eventually grew tired of the Denver Nuggets organization and left the team in a less than amicable manner to go play in a bigger market, that of New York. This departure forever damaged his relationship with the franchise. At the Knicks, expectations were enormous. Melo now had the mission of trying to win the team's third title in history, the first since the groundbreaking 1973. This time, he had a better roster than he had in Denver, which generated hope that the team could compete on equal footing with the Miami Heat of LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. But the problems soon began. During the 2012 season, while Melo was injured, a point guard named Jeremy Lin had an impressive run, becoming a sensation in New York. This period became known as Linsanity. However, Melo seemed bothered by his teammates' prominence and apparently ended up putting an end to that magical phase. Shortly after, Lin would be traded to the Houston Rockets. The Knicks have never managed to put together a deep playoff run. They lacked the squad depth to overcome stronger teams like the Indiana Pacers and the Miami Heat. In 2014, after another disappointing season without making the playoffs, Melo was given the opportunity to leave New York. He even seriously considered joining the Chicago Bulls, which almost happened, but at the last minute, he decided to sign a 5-year contract with the Knicks. In practice, he chose money over a real chance to compete for a title. This was costly. The team went into rapid decline, and Melo began to have friction with Phil Jackson, who was the president of the Knicks at the time. The next 3 years were a real nightmare. The team got worse every season, and it seemed like everyone around him was winning titles except him. Eventually, Melo received a new opportunity to compete on another team, now alongside the MVP and an Austrian-level player. Many believed that, for the good of the team, he would accept coming off the bench, but that would not be the case. With her now in the starting lineup, expectations for a win were extremely high, and the team would have to compete with the State Warriors' goal for the title of best team in the Western Conference. But that never even came close to happening. The Thunder were disappointing, especially Melo, and he had terrible performances in the playoffs against the Utah Jazz. It became clear that he was no longer at his peak, and his days with Maristar were over. The final years of Melo's career were sad to witness. He went through several teams without stability, and seemed to have been sidelined by the NBA itself. Unfortunately, Today, he is a player who is being forgotten by the fans. The players currently play for the franchises that made milestone and are achieving better results than he did. And you can tell that this affects him deeply, especially when it comes to Denver. As incredible as Melo was, this is a sad story of how selfishness and greed can ruin a career when you don't try to evolve and adapt to what your team needs. Throughout his career, Melo had several opportunities to be more collaborative and take on roles that perhaps weren't in his comfort zone, but which would have been very helpful in the long run. He recently even revealed that he almost joined the Miami Heat, but refused because he didn't want to be the team's fourth option. And the most ironic thing is that if he had accepted, he probably would have won a championship ring. Now, unfortunately, he is among the players of his generation who went without a title, while LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Dwayne Wade won several. As hard as it is to admit, Melo ended up being responsible for it himself. Early in his career, Trace McGrady was never considered the star player for the Toronto Raptors. That position clearly belonged to his cousin, Vince Carter, who was the franchise's host and the team's main star. But everything would change when McGrady decided to leave Toronto and sign with the Orlando Magic in the 2000 off-season in search of a new opportunity, the chance to lead his own team. And he wouldn't be alone. The Magic's plan was to form a super team in the East. Alongside McGrady would come Grant Hill and Tim Duncan, two of the biggest names in the NBA at that time. The idea was to assemble a trio that could dominate the conference and compete for multiple titles. But that dream didn't last long. Only one of them actually signed with Magic. Duncan ended up returning to the San Antonio Spurs, and that decision completely changed Orlando's fate. It all stemmed from a single conversation, and it was one specific man's fault that the franchise's story took a different turn. I'll go back a bit. You're going to Orlando, TMAC, and the possibility of having Tim Duncan there. What happened was that Tim and I were the same age, so we went together. And Tim, I think, was more in the know at the time than I was. But Tim wanted to be in Orlando if he was going. So, while we were there, everything was going well. I just had a feeling that this could happen. And I'm telling you, man, I remember yesterday, we were having lunch, and Tim's girlfriend. He asked Doc if the Houses and girlfriends could travel on a football team. You have to understand, that didn't happen back then. Doc said, no, it's a business trip, that doesn't happen, I don't allow that. Now, I didn't know that Saint Antonio started doing that. We went back to the hotel that night, and it was funny because for me and I, we were in the hotel, almost like the hotel room was tricked, and she said, he wasn't coming. I said, what do you mean? She said, when she asked that question. This practically ended Trace McGrady's chance of reaching the finals in his very first year in Orlando. And things only got worse. Grant Hill, who was supposed to be the team's co-star, had his career ruined by a serious injury that kept him out for virtually the entire 2001 season, and he was never the same after that. From then on, what followed in Orlando was a cycle of disappointments. McGrady was consistently eliminated in the first round of the playoffs in 3 out of the 4 seasons he wore the Magic jersey. The worst of all happened in 2003, when he opened up a 3-1 lead over the Detroit Pistons, but ended up being eliminated. And to make matters worse, the team was coached by Doc Rivers, who became famous for squandering leads in decisive series. Tired of losing, McGrady decided to try for a fresh start. He went to the Houston Rockets, where he would join Yao Ming, the center who was seen as the future of the league. The team seemed promising, with one of the most talented duos in the NBA, but the script repeated itself. McGrady never made it past the first round of the playoffs, despite playing at a very high level, and his knee injuries began to diminish his brilliance, reducing his explosiveness and athleticism. Eventually, he would be replaced, marking the end of his peak. It was sad to see a player who once rivaled Kobe Bryant become just a shadow of his former self, bouncing from team to team in his early 30s. But in 2013, one last chance arose. The San Antonio Spurs signed him shortly before the playoffs, not as a star, but as a mentor. And surprisingly, that team would reach the NBA Finals, facing the powerful Miami Heat of LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. The Spurs took a 3-2 lead in the series, and McGrady finally seemed to be one step away from the long-awaited title. Even with Purse practically having the title in their hands, a few missed free throws changed everything. They just needed to prevent the game from ending in a draw, and the championship would be guaranteed. But then came Ray Allen's historic shot, and the dream ended right there. And then. Trace McGrady was one free throw away from becoming an NBA champion. So close and yet so far. Shortly after those 2013 finals, McGregor announced his retirement, bitterly ending a career that deserved a much grander finale. And to make matters worse, the following year, Spurs won the 2014 title, which only made everything even more painful for him. Ultimately, T-Mac was one of those rare talents who seemed destined for greatness but fell victim to cruel circumstances, injuries, unstable teams, and sheer bad luck. Even without the ring, he continues to be remembered as one of the most talented and naturally skilled players in NBA history. Winning a championship is never easy. It may seem simple to assemble a team with all the right names on paper, but the reality is quite different. Some players, even with everything at their disposal, simply couldn't win a title. Some failed because of arrogance, others because they never had a fair chance. But in the end, some people were never born to win. That's the harsh truth about the NBA. There will always be players destined to end up without a ring, no matter how talented they are. And the 5 names we saw here weren't the first to experience this curse, and they certainly won't be the last.